In the quiet spring of April 1865, a chapter of American history, written in blood and fire, finally drew to a close. At Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, to Generals Ulysses S. Grant of the Union and Robert E. Lee of the Confederacy met in a modest farmhouse. The scene was heavy with the weight of years of relentless conflict. Outside, the armies that had clashed across countless battlefields stood silent, waiting. Inside, there was no grand ceremony of triumph, no gloating from the victor. Grant, representing a nation weary of war, extended an arm of mercy, not a fist of vengeance. His terms were generous. Confederate soldiers would not be paraded as prisoners. They were simply to lay down their arms and would be allowed to return to their homes, to their farms, to whatever remained of their former lives. Lee's men could even keep their horses, Grant reasoned, for the spring planting. It was an act of profound grace, a signal that the goal was not to punish, but to begin the painstaking process of mending a shattered country. With the stroke of a pen, the killing stopped. A fragile peace settled over the land, a quiet so deep it seemed almost unnatural after the constant roar of cannon and musket fire. Across the nation, a collective sigh of relief was breathed. The war was over. The Union was preserved. But the moment of peace was tragically brief. Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, a single shot rang out in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. President Abraham Lincoln, the man who had steered the nation through its darkest hour, was assassinated. The joy of victory was instantly swallowed by a profound and national grief. The bells that had just rung in celebration now told in mourning. A country that was just beginning to imagine a future of reconciliation was now leaderless, adrift in a sea of sorrow and uncertainty. The man who spoke of malice toward none, with charity for all, was gone, and with him, the clearest vision for how the divided states might once again become united. The nation mourned its fallen leader, even as the monumental task of rebuilding loomed before it. The end of the war was not an end to the struggle. It was merely the beginning of a new, and in many ways, more complex one. The war had settled one fundamental question. The secession was defeated, and the United States would remain a single, indivisible nation. It also brought about the single greatest social transformation in American history, the abolition of slavery. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, constitutionally ended the institution that had been the primary cause of the war. 4 million people who had been held in bondage as property were now, by law, free. It was a moment of liberation on a scale almost unimaginable, a promise of a new dawn of freedom. But the promise of legal freedom was not the same as the reality of true equality. The chains had been broken, but the deep-seated prejudices and economic systems built on centuries of exploitation did not simply vanish. The question was no longer if these 4 million newly freed African Americans were free, but what that freedom would actually mean. Would they have the right to vote, to own land, to receive an education, to be treated as equal citizens under the law? These were the questions that would define the next era. This era came to be known as Reconstruction. It was a period of breathtaking possibility and heartbreaking failure. For a brief, radical moment, it seemed as if the nation might truly remake itself. Under the protection of federal troops, black men were elected to local, state, and even national office. Public school systems were established for the first time in many parts of the South. The 14th and 15th Amendments were passed, granting citizenship, equal protection under the law, and voting rights to African American men. It was a revolutionary experiment in interracial democracy, an attempt to build a new South from the ashes of the old. But this progress was met with ferocious, violent resistance. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan launched campaigns of terror and intimidation to suppress the black vote and reassert white dominance. Slowly, the political will in the North to continue the difficult and expensive work of Reconstruction began to wane. By 1877, the last federal troops were withdrawn from the South. The promises of Reconstruction were abandoned. The transformation retreated, replaced by a new system of racial segregation and oppression known as Jim Crow. The wounds of the war, which had briefly seemed on the verge of healing, were torn open once more and left to fester for generations. The human cost of the Civil War is staggering to comprehend even today. The most common figure cited is that more than 620,000 soldiers died. But through it all, the United States did survive. It had faced the ultimate test and had not disintegrated. The Civil War answered a question that had haunted the nation since its very founding. That question was embedded in the Declaration of Independence, with its soaring rhetoric of all men being created equal, and in the Constitution, which simultaneously protected the institution of slavery. Could a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition of equality endure its own profound contradictions? Could a democracy survive a fundamental disagreement over its own meaning? The war provided the answer, yes, but that answer was delivered at a terrible, almost unbearable price. It affirmed that the nation was a permanent union, not a voluntary confederation of states that could leave at will. The principle of a strong central government, capable of upholding the ideals of the Republic, was firmly established. The conflict forged a new sense of national identity, one hardened in the fires of war and sanctified by the sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of its citizens. The United States began to be spoken of not as a plural noun, these United States are, but as a singular one, the United States is. Today, the cannons are silent. The battlefields are quiet parks, dotted with monuments and memorials. The soldiers who fought and died have long since turned to dust. But to think of the Civil War as merely a thing of the past is to misunderstand its enduring power. The echoes of those cannons remain with us. We hear them in our debates over states' rights versus federal power. We see their legacy in the ongoing struggle for racial justice and equality. We feel their presence in our very identity as Americans. The questions that drove men to fight at Gettysburg and Vicksburg are questions we still grapple with today. What does it mean to be an American? Who gets to be included in we the people? What are the responsibilities of citizenship? What is the true meaning of freedom? The Civil War was not just a war fought in the 1860s. It was, and in many ways still is, a struggle over the very soul of America, a battle over what this nation is, what it has been, and what it might still, one day, become. The work of building that more perfect union that Lincoln spoke of is a task that was left to us. The war ended, but its story continues, and we are all living in its next chapter. Thank you for watching this series on the American Civil War. If you found this journey through history meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. For more deep dives into the events that have shaped our world, hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next series. We appreciate your support. See you next time.